Okay, let's unpack this. This deep dive looks at a whole stack of sources presenting quite a story around the final years of the Biden presidency.
Right. And the focus is really specific here, isn't it? It's about alleged questions around executive authority and the use of this thing called an autopen.
Exactly. And just so you know what we're working with, the source material is pretty varied. We've got excerpts from a book titled The Autopen Scandal and the Shadow Presidency, internal White House emails cited in the sources, alleged medical records.
Testimony transcripts, investigative findings reported in the material. It's quite a collection.
Yeah, it is. So our mission really is to guide you through all this, pull out what the sources present as the key insights, and help you understand what they depict as, well, a constitutional nightmare.
A presidency allegedly run by a machine in unelected hands. That's the core claim in these documents.
Right, because what's laid out here is certainly uh, striking. The sources suggest it all kind of kicks off with a moment many people might remember. Joe Biden, Super Tuesday, March 2024.
Oh yeah, that comment caught on camera. He reportedly said, "I better not start the questions, I'll get in trouble."
And this material we're looking at alleges that wasn't just, a typical Biden gaffe.
No, the sources claim it was the first visible crack, as they put it, in a presidency held together by illusion. They're suggesting the person really running things wasn't Joe Biden.
Hmm. Someone else. And the sources try to back this up by pointing to what they describe as just unprecedented activity, sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, a huge volume of executive orders, pardons, funding authorizations, all supposedly signed off in incredibly short bursts of time.
They give numbers, right?
They do. The claims include figures like 67 executive orders, 21 pardons, and 11 funding authorizations. Get this, in just 2 weeks at the end of 2024.
Wow, 67 EOs in 2 weeks.
As the sources frame it, yeah. An extraordinary output for that kind of time frame.
And this rapid-fire activity, according to the source material, leads straight to the main piece of tech they focus on.
The autopen, described basically as a robotic device, a signature machine, allegedly used for signing official White House documents.
A signature machine for presidential actions. What kind of evidence did the sources claim pointed to this?
Well, they present what they call an impossible pattern.
Okay.
The sources allege they found identical signatures, like absolutely identical, across dozens of documents. Zero variation. Not a single shaky line, not one smudge.
Machine-level precision, they're saying?
That's the claim. And identical timestamps are also mentioned in these materials as part of this alleged pattern.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting then. If, as the sources suggest, Joe Biden wasn't always mentally present, or maybe not even physically there sometimes.
It raises the huge question they pose. Who is actually putting pen to paper or, activating the machine for these orders, these pardons, these funding authorizations?
Right, who had the authority? And
Yeah.
this question, according to the sources, is what supposedly kicked off a formal investigation.
Yes, and they introduced the key figures reportedly leading the charge. Representative James Comer and Pam Bondi, who's identified in these sources as the U.S. Attorney General at the time.
Okay, Comer and Bondi. And what did their initial investigation look like based on these documents?
The sources describe them reviewing these alleged autopen signatures, circling things they saw as inconsistencies. They also reportedly studied videos of Biden's public appearances.
Looking for what?
Moments the sources interpreted as him, say, staring blankly or whispering things that didn't make sense. Non sequiturs.
And Bondi's early take on this, the sources mention her view.
Yeah, it's presented as quite direct. She's quoted or paraphrased saying something like, if the man in the Oval Office didn't know what he was signing, then someone else did.
Okay.
And if that someone wasn't elected, we have a very, very big problem. It ties right into the core idea in these sources, that the actual executive power, the soul of it, was potentially hijacked.
And then the sources describe a pretty dramatic turn. A plain manila envelope.
Yeah, supposedly lands right on Comer's desk. Anonymous, plain envelope.
And inside?
Inside, the sources claim, were alleged medical records from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center.
Okay. And the diagnosis described in those alleged records, what did the sources claim it was?
They allege it was prostate cancer, specifically a Gleason score 9, described as stage 4 metastatic to bone.
Wow.
And the date on these alleged records was reportedly October 14th, 2023.
Just for context, what does that diagnosis mean, according to the sources?
Well, they describe a Gleason 9 with metastasis as a highly aggressive, advanced cancer that had already spread. A very, very serious prognosis.
Okay, that is serious. And the sources immediately flag a contradiction here.
Right away. They contrast this alleged October 2023 diagnosis date with public statements reportedly made by Dr. Kevin O'Connor, Biden's own physician.
Statements made later.
Months later, yeah, where he was quoted saying the president was, quote, healthy, vigorous, and fully capable.
So the source material views that discrepancy how?
They don't mince words. They interpret it as potential perjury and conspiracy. Strong language.
So this alleged health information, the sources suggest, gave Bondi what she saw as motive.
Exactly. Motive and potential cover-up. Because if the president was medically unfit, especially with a terminal diagnosis like the one alleged in these documents.
Could he have genuinely given informed consent for all those actions, especially the ones supposedly signed with an automated signature? That's the question the sources raise.
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to the forensic evidence detailed in the sources. A digital forensic analysis was reportedly done on the signatures themselves.
On the actual signatures found on the documents.
Yes. The sources detail the findings. They apparently reviewed 44 executive documents spanning from October 2023 to January 2025.
And what did this analysis allegedly find?
According to these materials, it concluded that all 44 documents were signed using the exact same autopen stroke mapping file.
Stroke mapping file, like the digital pattern for the signature.
Exactly. The digital blueprint telling the machine how to draw it. And, crucially, identical axis calibration, meaning the pen started from the precise same point every single time.
No variation at all.
Zero variance in pressure or tremor across all 44 signatures, according to the analysis described in the sources.
And Comer's reaction to this, as quoted in the sources?
It's pretty stark phrasing. He's reported as saying these signatures weren't signed by a man, they were deployed.
Deployed. Wow.
And his reported conclusion from that analysis, the office of the presidency wasn't occupied, it was impersonated.
So what the sources really want you, the listener, to grasp here isn't just some technical quirk about a signature.
No. They claim this forensic evidence suggests a mechanical process completely took over from the president's own hand, which, in their view, raises fundamental doubts about the legitimacy of every single document signed like that during that period.
And all of this, the signatures, the health questions, the forensics, it culminated, according to the sources, in a congressional hearing.
Yeah, and the atmosphere is depicted as pretty charged. Comer with a cold steel tone, Bondi supposedly stacking email printouts like they were evidence bags. Very dramatic scene painted.
And Jill Biden, the First Lady, she reportedly testified.
She did. As presented in the sources, her initial defense was basically that she was protecting her husband, asking, what else could she have done in that difficult situation?
How did Bondi respond to that, according to the sources?
The sources describe Bondi's counter as, quite sharp. She's quoted accusing the First Lady of weaponizing him.
Weaponizing?
Yeah, alleging she used a man in cognitive decline to, quote, rubber stamp pardons, sign off on slush funds, and protect political allies, framing it very bluntly as manipulation.
And this is where those internal emails came into play.
Right. The sources claim these emails became central evidence. They detail messages like, Dr. B requests autopen authorization, or Joe will not attend, please run autopen for budget packet, and another one, Dr. B says this takes priority.
Dr. B, presumably referring to Dr. Biden.
That's how the sources interpret it, yes. They use these alleged emails to try and link scheduling control, decision-making, and specifically the use of the autopen to individuals other than the president himself.
Is there a specific example they highlight?
Yes, a really striking one detailed in the source material. A presidential pardon allegedly signed at 4:17 a.m.
4:17 in the morning.
That's the claim. And according to testimony presented in the hearing sources, this was just 12 minutes after President Biden was reportedly sedated at Walter Reed for some kind of medical procedure.
So signed while he was supposedly sedated.
That's the implication made in the source material. They also mentioned Leo Terrell being present at the hearing.
What was his reported contribution?
According to the sources he interjected, bringing up the Federal Elder Abuse Statute, Title 18 U.S.C. Section 2011. He apparently suggested the evidence presented met the legal bar for a DOJ referral based on exploiting a senior for political or financial gain.
Wow. The sources also describe an emotional moment during the testimony.
They do. Jill Biden's reported plea about, the pain of watching someone you love fade away.
Which must have been incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. But it was reportedly contrasted very sharply by Bondi's response, who was quoted as saying simply, "So did America."
Oof. Heavy. And did Jill Biden's stance change after that, according to the sources?
According to the sources, yes. She reportedly shifted to attacking the proceedings, calling the hearing a witch hunt, a MAGA circus,
And targeting Bondi directly.
reportedly branding her Trump's cleanup crew. The sources also say she compared the situation to Ronald Reagan's second term and insisted defiantly, "I didn't steal power, I kept a presidency alive."
A powerful claim. And Bondi's final counterargument in the sources.
It's presented as equally powerful. She reportedly said, "What you held wasn't just a man, it was the Constitution, and you bent it to fit your grief."
And she presented more evidence then.
Reportedly, yes. Digital traces of Jill Biden's own calendar entries marked autopen authorization with her initials next to them, leading to Bondi's reported conclusion. "You weren't First Lady. You were acting president without an election."
A stunning accusation based on those sources. Okay, moving on. The sources describe another, perhaps unexpected, name coming up during the hearing when Comer was reading the list of autopen recipients.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The sources make a point of highlighting Liz Cheney's name appearing on that list. They note the surprise, saying, if there was one name nobody expected to hear on that list, it was hers.
Liz Cheney received a pardon via autopen. What were the specifics alleged in the sources?
The claim is it was a preemptive pardon, granted with reportedly no press release, no public record at all.
And the timing.
Allegedly signed at 3:44 a.m. on January 5th, 2025. Again, the sources place this timing within the context of earlier testimony, suggesting Biden was sedated at Walter Reed around then.
A preemptive pardon signed at 3:44 a.m. while the president was allegedly sedated. How did Cheney defend this, according to the sources?
The sources describe her defense as claiming White House counsel advised the pardon could, quote, help stabilize the country, and that she needed protection from potential future show trials, the vendettas, the Maggia witch hunts.
And the investigators' reaction to that explanation?
The sources present their response as quite skeptical. Comer reportedly questioned the whole premise, why pardon someone preemptively if they weren't under investigation or subpoena? He's quoted asking, what exactly were they preemptively pardoning you for?
A fair question, perhaps. And Bondi.
Bondi's reported rebuke was sharp. What you stood against was accountability, and what you embraced was a backdoor deal. That's the quote in the source material.
Was the documentary evidence presented regarding Cheney, according to the sources?
Yes, the sources cite email evidence here too. Alleged correspondence between Cheney's chief of staff and someone identified as Dr. B's scheduler, dated just 3 days before the pardon was signed.
And the content of that email?
Reportedly read something like, Liz's matter must be handled quietly. Authorization is pre-cleared. Timing is critical. No headlines.
Pre-cleared. Interesting phrasing. And Comer's take on this Cheney pardon.
His reported conclusion, according to the sources cited, you weren't stabilizing the country, Congresswoman. You were stabilizing your political future.
So after all this testimony, all this evidence presented in the sources, what was the final outcome? What did the committee conclude?
Well, the sources detail the committee's formal conclusions. They found, based on the evidence presented to them, that documents were signed under fraudulent circumstances using automated devices,
Okay.
that internal communications linked these signatures to the control of non-elected individuals, and that pardons were issued benefiting political allies who had, or might have had, legal exposure.
And Bondi's summary of this?
As quoted in the sources, it was blunt. Somebody used a robot to launder justice, and they did it while the president slept.
So based on those conclusions, did they make referrals for prosecution?
Yes, the sources list the individuals formally referred by the committee to the DOJ for criminal investigation and potential prosecution.
Who was on that list, according to the sources?
According to the source material, it included Jill Tracy Biden, cited for unlawful assumption of executive authority and federal elder abuse; Elizabeth Lynn Cheney for receipt and concealment of a preemptive pardon; Hunter Biden for alleged participation in pardon agreements for benefit.
Others as well.
Yes, Adam Schiff, reportedly for aiding in communication and shielding recipients via classified loops. And Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the physician, for alleged concealment of medical incapacity and falsification of disclosures.
That's quite a list of referrals based on these sources. And politically, what happened in the House?
The sources describe a pretty historic House vote following this, a formal nullification
Nullification of what?
of all presidential pardons signed through what they determined were unauthorized mechanical means, specifically between October 2023 and February 2025.
So they just erased those pardons.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Comer's words, as quoted in the sources describing the effect, were stark. null void illegitimate.
And what was the immediate fallout described in the sources?
The DOJ reportedly started preparing briefs. Judges began re-examining cases that were affected by these now nullified pardons. Cheney's lawyers were reportedly requesting clarification, and there were whispers, the sources say, of a second wave of subpoenas coming.
And the autopen machine itself, what happened to it?
According to the sources, it was seized by the FBI, bagged, tagged as Executive Signature Fraud JRB, and placed in an evidence room.
So hearings, referrals, nullified pardons, seems like a lot of conclusions were reached. But the sources don't quite end there, do they?
No, not quite. Even with all that, the sources leave us and you listening with this central kind of lingering mystery.
Which is?
Okay, if Joe Biden didn't sign these documents, as alleged, and all these key figures have now been referred for investigation based on this material, who actually authorized it all? Who gave the green light for this alleged crime to happen again and again?
Because the machine doesn't run itself.
Exactly. As the sources point out, a robotic pen needs instructions. An autosignature doesn't just pick names out of a hat. A partner needs someone with authority to say yes.
And the sources suggest it wasn't just the doctor or the son or the wife acting alone out of grief.
That's the perspective presented in these sources, yes. They argue those individuals might have facilitated or benefited, but someone else had to be orchestrating it at a higher level.
So the source poses this question directly to you, the listener, as its final thought.
Right. They suggest looking for someone else. Someone who knew the system, knew how to pull the strings, had the access, but maybe stayed out of the direct spotlight. Someone who didn't just benefit, but, the sources allege, actually engineered the whole situation.
The trail, they claim, doesn't stop at the Resolute desk.
That's the implication. Who was that person? And, the sources provocatively ask, are they still inside the room?
And really, that's the core of what we've unpacked today from these provided sources. These claims describing a presidency allegedly operating under, well, fraudulent circumstances.
Yeah, involving alleged secret health issues, the use of mechanical signatures, and this whole network of individuals supposedly benefiting from acts the sources deem unauthorized.
The significance, as presented in this material, goes way beyond just how a document gets signed, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It strikes at the heart of executive power, raising this fundamental question these sources pose. Who was really governing during that time?
So, while the sources report that pardons were nullified and referrals were made, they ultimately leave you with that unresolved question.
Who really held the pen? It's a question that makes the story, at least as presented in these sources, feel, well, far from over.